Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll call to order our Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee on Monday, November 23rd. We are operating under the executive order afforded by the governor due to the COVID crisis, which allows us to do these meetings remotely. The public is able to participate using the Zoom platform, and at the appropriate times, we'll call on the public and they can reflect their desire to be heard by raising their virtual hand, or if they're on the phone, they can press *9. Everybody will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. And I think that's probably the core of that. We'll go to our clerk and see if we can get a roll call, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair Smith.
Present.
Gibbons.
Here.
Sinks.
Here.
Abekoga.
Here.
Thank you. All are present.
All right. So just a quick announcement. There are two of us who have to leave for a competing meeting at noon. And so we're going to, if people don't object, we're going to reorder the agenda to move the CEO report to the end. Nobody's objecting, so we'll consider that good. We will go to the public at this point. We have a comment on matters not listed on the agenda. Any member of the public may address the body for up to 3 minutes on matters not on the agenda. If you wish to do so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand, or you can do so by pressing *9 if you're on the phone. Seeing none, we'll come back to our group, and we have our consent calendar, which has got one item, the minutes.
I'll move the consent calendar.
I second.
So that was Rod and then Liz. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on the consent calendar? If you wish to do so, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, you can press *9. Seeing none, I'll come back to us. Is there any comments or discussion on this item? Seeing none, we will get our clerk and we'll do a roll call vote.
Thank you. Chair Miller.
Here.
Vice Chair, is that a?
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Smith.
Yes.
Gibbons.
Yes.
Sinks.
Yes.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries unanimously.
All right. Thank you, guys. We're going to delay the CEO report, as previously mentioned. We're going to go to item 3, to amend and restate engagement letter with Hall Law PC. Is this girl?
It's me, Monica.
Monica, excellent.
Good morning. Quick summary. So we've had in place a contract that would have allowed us to use Steve Hall legal counsel services, either through his Trotman Sanders, and then most recently through his new company called Hall Energy Law PC. And so we've been using Steve Hall since 2017, really to negotiate all of our power supply agreements, whether they be EEI master agreements that allow us to do a host of transactions with different counterparties, or to negotiate PPAs, long-term PPAs to meet our renewable portfolio standard, or to actually execute transactions under either the EEIs or other forms of agreements. So Steve has been instrumental to helping us meet all of our procurement requirements, both the ones that are directed by the board and the ones that are mandated by the state. So in January 2019, the board authorized the execution of this letter of engagement, which set a budget of $300,000 for a term of 3 years. And then in January, that was January 2020, when you executed an amendment and restated letter of engagement with Steve Hall to increase the NTE, the not to exceed amount or budget, to $300,000 for a term which expires January 14, 2022. We've been operating under certain controls to manage the expenses under Steve Hall's or the Hall Energy Law PC engagement. But those expenses have actually exceeded our projections due to several reasons, and I'll go over those later in the presentation. But for now, the request to the executive committee is that you recommend approval to increase the budget from $300,000 to $400,000 with the term and scope of work to remain the same. Next slide. So the reason that we need additional funds, first is the power purchase agreements. So the negotiation and execution of the PPAs have been much more complex than we had ever anticipated. And part of this we saw through the 2019 RFO and the PPAs that we negotiated at that point. But then things got more complicated when the CPUC and the CalISO started to change the rules of how we might operate a hybrid or solar plus storage resources in the future. So that required a whole bunch of back and forth with the developers. And some of it is legal, some of it is commercial, but Steve Hall has been there for the most part with us through that process. Also, the number of PPAs that we ended up executing through the 2019 RFO was about 2 or 3 more than we had anticipated. So we ended up negotiating a total of 5 PPAs through that process, and we had only expected to do 3. And then we issued the 2020 RFO, again with the intent of only negotiating 3 to 4 PPAs, and we're now up to 5 to 6. And so the number of PPAs to negotiate has increased really because we see the need for executing more PPAs is necessary in order to ensure that we meet our compliance and RPS targets. And then also during the term of this engagement with Steve Hall, we ended up having to terminate one of our PPAs. And while that was unfortunate, and the PPA certainly provided a whole lot of direction on how that would happen, it still required legal assistance in order to come up with a settlement and make that termination effective. We've been in the process of amending our PPA with RE Slate, which again has required a lot of time and resources. And the board approved or delegated an authority to the CEO last month to execute amendment to that agreement. Again, Steve Hall has been with us through that whole process along with SVCE. And then for all the PPAs that we have in place, you would think that once we execute them, that we can kind of forget them, but there's always something that comes up, and we rely on Steve and his legal support on all those engagements. With master agreements, he is the key attorney that we've been using on negotiating master agreements, although we do have other legal counsel at our disposal that we could use to support that effort. But for now, he's been primarily the attorney helping us. And with our recent credit rating that was granted, we have an opportunity to amend all those agreements. And the board actually, again, authorized the CEO to make those changes. And we expect to rely on Steve Hall again to help us not just negotiate, but put those new credit terms in place. And then resource adequacy. This is again something that we didn't anticipate the complexity of the types of transactions that we were going to do under resource adequacy would have changed so dramatically in the last year. But the CPUC imposed some new rules around how we can and cannot use imports for resource adequacy. And so we really had to create a new product from scratch that didn't exist that we thought would meet the CPUC's requirements. And so that required a lot of engagement with, again, Steve Hall to help us negotiate the terms of those new products with our suppliers and then execute those agreements. Steve was also the attorney that multiple CCAs used to do some incremental RA purchase as part of a mandated procurement by the CPUC. And then we also expect him to work on other negotiations and transactions. And so these are the main reasons. Again, we put in place controls. We're monitoring the expenses. It's just the forecast of what we think we're going to need between now and the end of the year will surpass the budget that we currently have with them. Next slide. So you can see we expect as of now to be at $278,000 roughly, and the budget is only $300,000. We will exceed the $300,000 within a month easily if we don't get an amendment, and then we'll have to rely on the other attorney that we have for transactional and PPA negotiations. But that attorney, while very good, has not been involved in our discussions, PPAs and everything else. And so we'd have to bring him up to speed. And I don't think we have sufficient budget to do that with them. So because of that, we're requesting an amendment to the amended and restated agreement. Next slide. Yeah, to increase the budget or the not to exceed amount from 300,000 to 400,000. Questions?
We start with Liz.
A couple of quick questions and then discussion later. Do these require budget changes?
I believe, I will have to confirm that, but I believe we have sufficient budget within the overall non-commodity budget to accommodate this increase.
Okay, because that was one of my big comments about, do we have a contingency fund for these types of things that wouldn't alter the budget every time? So that would be helpful to confirm. Thank you. And is there anything in the PPA agreements or other agreements that would allow us to recoup legal fees?
That's a good question. That would have been something that we could have, that would have been more relevant to the negotiations with Recurrent or RE Slate or with Pattern when we did the termination. But the PPAs the most of the PPAs that we're negotiating are new PPAs. And so each party is expected to carry their cost to negotiate those.
Well, forgive me, this is specific to the situation with Pattern and our RE Slate. Is there a clause in our agreements that if there is a default or termination, that they cover our legal fees?
Yeah, so I can't speak to the Pattern one because that was all done under confidentiality.
Yeah.
The RE Slate one, we did include, we did talk about just the costs associated with the changes that we have to make, and the what we ended up negotiating with them is sufficient, we believe, or fair to cover our expenses.
Okay, but it might be something to consider in agreements going forward, just having that not need negotiation, just be a matter of fact. Thank you.
Mhm.
Are there other questions? Let me check with the public. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, you can do that by pressing *9. Seeing none, I come back to us. Is there discussion and or motion on this item?
I would make a motion.
I'll second.
All right, is there any other discussion? Let me just thank staff for continuing to do battle on our behalf. And sometimes with the state stuff, it really does feel like battle, and it's pretty rough and tumble business we're in, huh? And with that, I think we'll go for our roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
Sinks,
Yes, and I'll just note this is the rounding error on our procurement costs.
thank you. Adekoga,
Aye.
thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
We don't round anything off, Rod. We got it to the penny, okay? All right, next up, item 4, outgoing chair, vice chair planning.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a topic that was brought up at our last board meeting by none other than Chair Miller, who is great in thinking ahead and what we should be doing once he and Vice Chair Smith depart our board of directors. That would then leave a vacancy in the chair and vice chair positions at our January board meeting, in addition to this body, which is the executive committee. So the purpose of this is to discuss and recommend a process for beginning the January board meeting in their absence. After consulting with general counsel, we have 2 options here. The first would be to have the alternate director of Saratoga, Mary Lynn Bernald, open the meeting and conduct the nominations for chair, or we can have the board appoint an interim chair at our next meeting in December, and that person would serve until the regular chair is selected at that meeting, which is our annual meeting. So up for discussion is a discussion for you all to decide how you would like to recommend a process for the board in how to run the January meeting in the absence of our chair and vice chair, in addition to deciding how you would like to begin this meeting for the executive committee in January, since Vice Chair Smith and Chair Miller will not be here.
So a quick comment, just because Saratoga was put on there, just to be really clear, the odds are that it will not be Mary Lynn Bernald. It'll be some random new elected official who's been serving for a grand total of 3 weeks, who's never led a meeting and never been to a single agency assignment. So I don't believe that we should even consider option number 1, given the high degree of variability on who the appointee could be from Saratoga. I say it politely.
Okay, we got it.
And with that, Liz, you have some thoughts?
So I agree with you very much, not quite for all the reasons you mentioned. I would like to put up an option, and since Margaret's here, that would be helpful. Could we revert to our past chair who knows the ropes, knows the meetings, done the process and all of that? If Margaret has an availability on her calendar for all those meetings, my proposal would be to revert to a past chair, the most recent past chair.
Yes, is it when is the exec board meeting? Could you remind me what we decided for that? I can do January 9th. Is that right? No, 12.
So we have it on the books for January 22nd. However, because we'll be getting 3 new members, that could change.
I mean, I was also prepared to suggest Liz, who's one of our longest standing board members. I think she would do a fine job as well.
There are 2 levels to this, you guys. There's like picking somebody, and then there's like creating a process. And I think it would behoove us to have a process that was something like, if we got to a meeting and the chair and vice chair were not present, the clerk would call for nominations for a temporary whatever, and we would have a process. Because then it
Well,
covers any contingency of the chair and vice chair. You know, Nancy and I could have ran off to Mexico this week for fun in the sun, right? and then you would have been up a creek.
Could have zoomed in though, Howard.
Well, it depends on where you were in Mexico,
So-
right? I don't
So
know.
what do we know about Margaret, you and Liz? Are you both intending to continue?
I'm assuming that everybody will, but my issue, Rod, wasn't the people, it was the process. And if we had a process that let us solve it, then when you got to that meeting in January, you know, Margaret or Liz would both be there presumably, and they could sort it out with the members there.
I understand. I mean, you know, in my mind, both Liz and Margaret, if they were continuing, would both do a great job, and I'd be happy to see either one of them convene the meeting until, the election, right, of a new board chair. And the benefit of having them do that, as opposed to just saying, let's open it up all the way, is, you know, they've both invested the time and, you know, are privy to the discussion we're having here today, and are generally up on what the agency's doing. So
My assumption is it would come out to be one of those 2, but we could give them a process to fish rather than just giving the future board a fish.
I'm fine. I think Liz would do a great job. I'm fine to do it if needed. Maybe that could be the recommendation, that it comes out of the executive committee.
Well, I'd be fine with that. Whatever is needed is fine. I am making myself available during this time, so that's fine.
Nancy?
So to your point, Howard, I think it was your point, or maybe it was Rod's. Maybe the motion could be to propose a process that The first choice would be the most recent prior board chair. And if there are none, then the longest serving director.
On that committee or
On,
on,
on the executive committee.
well, no, I was thinking if we made it generic, like if the two guys didn't show up for finance, then you would follow the same process at finance or the same process at LAC or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Because I think it's the longest serving person on that particular body.
And then you could say the longest serving. I think maybe you need something the longest serving from the largest.
Just for the interim situation, we could just do longest serving.
Yeah.
Because it's only going to be a meeting, one meeting of a subcommittee and one meeting of the board. So just make that would be clear.
I think if we did it right, this would be like our permanent backup plan. If we ever got stuck again,
Right.
we would go to the recommendation would be the past chair. And if that person was unavailable, the longest serving member of that body. I think that makes it pretty straightforward for both meetings in January too, then.
Sounds good to me.
And then if Liz and I run off to Mexico, you know, then there's no complication. I just need a vacation. I don't know about the rest of you guys. Rod and I are running off to heating.
Can I come?
No, Howard, you need a new backpack, Howard. You need to upgrade your 1970s pack frame.
Did you like that pack frame, Rod?
I have one just like it, but it's you need to stop by REI this holiday season.
For those who missed it, after 90 years, we did finish the Saratoga to the Sea Trail, and I got to have the virtual opening, which I did in a 1978 North Face backpack. It looks
Yes, you did.
fully packed too. Anyway, back to our point here. Garish, you have some comments on this?
Yeah, not so much comments in terms of what the next steps are. It seems like we would write up a recommendation for the entire board to adopt, that this would be the new process. So in the December meeting, we would propose this, and I'm thinking the board would either just say the board adopts this, then we'll know who the interim chair is going to be for January. Or they could make whatever changes they want to, but we will, based on the discussion right now, we'll write up that recommendation for the board.
Yeah, if the chair is available, right? I mean, that's the whole trick to this, is just to be able to deal with the dynamic uncertainties of the world. I mean,
So Howard, not to make life difficult here, but when is your council turning over?
December 15th.
Oh, 15th, okay. And you have we have a Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board on the 9th. So that's the same night as your council meeting, is it not?
I don't think so.
No.
You got it clear, okay.
Yeah, but it was my
Wednesday.
plan to be here and to chair that meeting.
Okay, all right, and Margaret, are you okay? I know you're going forward, but you're okay for the 9th?
December 9th, yes.
And
Okay,
Nancy will be on the 9th also.
good,
I
okay.
think the only person that's not is Rod, right?
We turn over on the 3rd,
Right.
How can-
assuming there's nobody protesting the election
But it's not-
certification and asking for a manual recount followed by an automated recount.
But forgive me, Rod, I don't think it's certified until the 4th or 5th, is it?
No, it's supposed to be a month after.
30
so
days.
It should be certified the
30
afternoon,
days.
December 30th. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's okay.
Okay, so I think that's the proposal that's on the table. Let me check with the public, then we can come back and do a motion and finish this off. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. Or if you're on the phone, you can do that by pressing *9. Seeing none, I think the proposal on the table is that at any meeting where the chair and vice chair are not present, the recommendation would be for the body to appoint as an interim the previous chair of that committee or body. And if that person is not present, the longest serving board member. And I guess you need a fallback in case everybody's brand new, which is, draw by lot. And then no matter what happens, we have a way to end up with the chair of any committee at any time.
Well, I'll take the motion as stated initially. I'll make that motion.
Okay.
It's just a recommendation, or do you need a motion?
There should be a motion. This will be your recommendation to the board.
It said action next to it, so I was kind of thinking.
Second.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Are there any further discussion? Thinking I'm seeing none, we'll just go to the clerk for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Miller,
Aye.
Vice Chair Smith,
Yes.
Gibbons,
Yes.
Sinks,
Yeah,
Abekoga.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
See, even if Silicon Valley Clean Energy can set themselves up for an organized and clear transition, I'm sure they can do it in other branches of government. Moving forward. Next up is Silicon Valley Clean Energy Information Update on the 2021 board elections.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Me again. So this is really an info update for you all on how we are going to handle our board elections come January and February. Of course, this is to review the selection process and timeline for that. So our annual meeting is in January, as you know, and that is where we will select our chair and vice chair and executive committee members. And come February, we will select the remaining committees. So the proposed process, very similar to years past. I will present an informational item at the December board meeting, similar to this. Following that, in writing, I will send out an email with an official call for letters of interest for chair and vice chair, as well as for this committee. I would request that those who are interested in serving would let me know. We would then make those selections for chair, vice chair, and executive committee in January at our January board meeting. I would follow that meeting with written correspondence with the committee matrix worksheet that was included in your agenda packets. And I would distribute that and request that that be filled out. That pretty much lets us know if you're interested in continuing, no longer interested, or interested in starting a new committee. And then committee assignments would be made at our February Board of Directors meeting. Again, that's remaining committees excluding executive, which would be appointed in January. Timeline again, so December board meeting, info item, followed by written instruction that Friday. In terms of deadline, we would request that any letters of interest be due January 4th after the holiday. On January 13th, we would make those selections for chair, vice chair, and executive group. And then following that, we would send out written instruction for our remaining committees. We're requesting those worksheets be due February 1st, and we would then make those assignments on February 10th at our board meeting. And that concludes the process and timeline. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anyone have questions on this item? Let me check with the public. Any member of the public wish to speak on this item? If you wish to do so, please indicate that by raising your virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, you can do that by pressing *9. Seeing none. Any discussion on this item? I think our silence means we're super happy with what you got planned, so make it all work smoothly and we're great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Next up then is item 9, the digital pivot update, customer engagement survey.
All right, thanks, Chair, and good morning, directors. Pam and I are going to take, if we go to the next slide, please, are going to take you through an update here on where we are with our digital pivot, as it's known. This is our effort to significantly increase our channels of customer engagement, leveraging principally electronic channels. So we're going to do a quick update on our FY21 digital goals and where we are
status-wise. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about a recent and very comprehensive customer engagement survey that we completed. The idea here was to create a baseline that we could use to understand where our customers currently are in terms of their thinking on electrification, their preferences and such, their understanding of Silicon Valley clean energy. Do they know about us? Do they understand that that we have resources to offer as it relates to electrification? So we're going to take you through that survey, and we also piloted a new approach in the survey process, which was administering the survey by socioeconomic quartile. So we're going to talk about this new equity lens that we applied in terms of understanding our customers' needs and preferences. So interesting results there. And we're interested as we go through this in your feedback on this information, what you'd like to know more or less about, because we intend to bring this back to the full board in January. Next slide. So why a digital pivot? This is a strategic plan goal, and it's one of a handful of key FY21 focus areas for our organization. Of course, it's very important to our mission that we empower customers with the awareness, knowledge, and resources needed to make clean energy choices. Historically, our principal way of engaging with the public was face-to-face, as shown in the picture on the right. We spent a lot of time tabling and doing presentations to the community, but that's not very leveraged. There's only 30 plus people at SVCE, and we have 270,000 customers. So we really need to work on ways to greatly expand our channels of engagement. And of course, electronic communications are ideal for that. And we've spent time over this last year building new electronic channels. As it turns out, this is especially important given what's going on with COVID, because these channels are very convenient and they're safe. Pam, over to you.
Sure, yeah. So on the next slide is I'll take over. So good morning, directors. So here's a look at some of the engagement tools that we have brought online worked to actually really bring online over the course of a year. So just want to note that, in addition to some of these things, there are still traditional outreach mechanisms that we're using, like putting information out in our newsletter, working with your member agencies on putting out information through those existing communication channels. And we also have printed mailers going out with our upcoming power content labels. So it isn't necessarily digital end all be all, because we know not everyone is online, but many, many customers are. We'll see coming up in some of the survey results. And so again, just a review of the digital tools that we do have. Of course, eHub, we now have a place to send people to learn about electrification and all electric appliances, solar and battery. You've seen those resources. Something else we have is with Granicus, which some in many cities actually use, and some within our service territory, their Gov Delivery platform, which allows us to actually make sure our customers are receiving our emails, because it has this government whitelisting as a public agency. We're able to utilize this resource. So we can use it for email marketing, also for delivering required notifications that we have to send out every year that the CEC or CPUC requires us to do. And then of course, digital advertising, we're going to be really working to expand awareness of the resources we have available, and participate in an electrification awareness campaign with the Switches On, which I'll go over some of those updates next. And of course, some seasonally themed promotions that will be going out, and I'll talk about that too. So next slide, please. So our email outreach goals that are identified in the board adopted strategic plan is that we're going to conduct at least 3 or more full-scale direct email communication campaigns. So one of these you may have seen has already gone out last month, where we announced to all customers who have an email on file with SVCE that we have these new eHub resources available to them. And with other emails that we have planned, the goal we identified is we're going to send out at least 1 million emails this year. And we also want to measure the effectiveness of this and try to reach and get at least 20,000 unique visitors to our website and to actually engage with the eHub resources that we've put together. And ways we're going to do that throughout the year, as we're playing sort of the long game here, is that the email and digital marketing campaigns are going to leverage different seasonal trends. So you can imagine seeing something about EVs around Earth Day, or having cooling products during summer heat waves. And of course, battery storage will be an important one as we approach the next PSPS season. So next slide. So our online product promotions, this is something that is very new for SVCE, but considered a tried and true practice in the energy and utility space. We're going to be taking advantage of holiday shopping trends that are starting this week, as you could imagine, with Black Friday. The goal for this first promotion is that we really want to just start small, learn from it. The items that we're using for this first promotion is we're going to have a $50 downstream rebate or a reward for customers who purchase a portable induction cooktop. We have LED light bulbs and smart power strips. And as we try out this new approach for SVCE, we're going to take the lessons learned through this process and be able to expand it to additional strategic electrification items in the future, which is an exciting opportunity for us. And next slide. Okay, so to really achieve our goals of engaging customers online and driving traffic to all these resources that we've spent so much time putting in place, we're going to be running an ad campaign starting in January. And it's going to try to really reach different customer segments with a variety of ads that speak to what customers are interested in. Because of course, not every, we have a lot of customers with EVs already, but perhaps they want to know about their solar and storage options, or really the push around all electric appliances and the all electric home. So we're going to try to meet customers wherever they consume their media, and running this ad campaign. So next slide. I shared an update about this at a high level at the last board meeting, but just a reminder that the Building Decarbonization Coalition is running this regional electrification awareness campaign. And we're helping to fund and deploy the ads locally here in our service territory, really, again, trying to achieve our goals of increasing awareness about the benefits of electrification. We are also in a unique position with all these other resources we just talked about, especially with eHub, that we have a place to send customers. Once they learn about these opportunities, the Switch is On website is its own thing as well for those that don't have the resources we do, but we're going to be doing a combined effort where we're also driving traffic to our site and our resources through this. And the messaging really complements the eHub messaging that's going out. So it also sort of dovetails in timing wise, where this campaign is happening now, and then our other efforts are going to ramp up in the new year. Next slide. So this fall, we thought it would be a really good time to measure customer awareness and engagement before we started these mass marketing campaigns. This is the first time we've included questions about SVCE customer awareness because our past surveys were more focused on market research that helped inform our communications and messaging. We included some of the same questions about electrification awareness as well from surveys we had done in the past to see if any of the trends have changed. Also because, as Dawn alluded to, we did administer the survey by socioeconomic indicators, which is different from, again, what we've done in the past, which was more like a geographic representation of where customers were located by community. We're also going to do a follow-up survey next year, and that's going to be part of our evaluation and measurements of our eHub and digital marketing effectiveness. Next slide. So getting into the methodology of this survey, which was conducted earlier this fall, it was done by email and backfilled by phone with our E&V consultants, ADM. And the difference here, as we talked about, is that we targeted responses by SEVI quartile. And what SEVI is, well, first of all, I'll just back up and say that this isn't something that just we kind of made up, because this is a project of the Decarbon Grid Innovation team as they're working to define and make recommendations for how SVCE applies equity through our work. And it is something that is being considered in some CPUC proceedings as a way to apply this equity lens to other state programs. So we looked at this indicator because it gives socioeconomic characteristics by census tract within our service territory. And where other traditional indicators of disadvantaged communities, or even just looking at like care and FIRA enrollments, those are qualifiers that are like categorical measures, where SEVI and those kinds of indicators are comparative, and they look at how customers arrange along the census tracts along a continuum, which can change. So this is part of the recommendation. This is what's been really interesting to look at. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that this is how the different quartiles map out across our service territory. And I don't know, Dawn, feel free to jump into if you have anything to add. But what I like to show about this map is that if we go to the next slide, this shows what's the disadvantaged community designations used by Cal EnviroScreen, which this is been the common way to measure disadvantaged communities for a lot of the state, like a lot of the CPUC programs. So if you just kind of look at the two, you see that it's just, there's overlap where you see our DAC communities. And if you want to just kind of flip back, Andrea, sorry, to the SEVI, you still see those same areas represented, but then there's more nuance, which we all know there's a lot of different communities within each member agency, and we felt that this would be a really interesting way to look at things. I don't know, Don, if you have anything to add, otherwise I'm going to jump into some of the demographics.
No, I think you can keep rolling. Thanks.
All right, so sorry, jumping ahead then, here we go. So what's interesting when we looked at the different quartiles is that some of our expectations were shown in the results. So looking at home ownership versus renters, you can see in SEVI 1, which is the most economically well-off quartile, high percentage of home ownership, where SEVI 4, still it's pretty split, 45 to 55, but you do see more renters in those more economically vulnerable categories. And then internet access too, this was encouraging to see that there is a high amount of accessibility, since we are talking about digital engagement, that we wanted to make sure we checked for that. And next slide. I just want to point out, if you just want to look at the arrows here, looking at home type as well. So thinking about the types of resources we're pointing people to, thinking about our single family homeowners and where those fall along the different quartiles versus where you have the higher SEVI quartiles are more likely to be in multifamily housing. Next slide. This is also interesting to look at when we are talking about our EV programs and promotions. The availability of just having a home near a charging outlet or an outlet. You can see here that that's a barrier for the higher quartiles. Next slide. Also, asked about languages spoken in the home. So continuing to make sure we consider language access and accessibility in the materials that we put out, as well as our outreach and advertising methods. And then with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll turn it back over to Dawn, who's going to kind of give some more of the survey results.
Yeah, maybe I'll pause just for a moment. Any questions on this SEVI methodology before we jump into a handful of results?
Just a couple of questions / comments. I have other data sources, and it doesn't indicate that 22% of everybody in the valley owns an EV. but our data shows that 22% of our customers own an EV. That makes me weird. And the other one that makes me a little weird is that a quarter of our people speak a language that wasn't English, Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, Tagalog. So what's our data source? I'm wondering how this data comes about and how reliable it is, because it doesn't correlate as well to other data that I already know about.
So, yeah, great question. So remember that the survey pool here they are SVCE customers. So the contact information that the outreach was done via was from our database of customers. Secondly, the respondents indicated an interest in responding to a survey that is about energy, and I believe sustainability might have been in there too. We didn't, there was no pre-communication of SVCE per se, but again, the target audience here for the survey are our customers, and they were people that were interested in responding on the topic. So not perfectly scientific, but reasonably representative of our customer base. And we did make every effort to have 1/4 of the respondents be from each of the SEVI quartiles, and that was done literally to the number.
But this is still going to be the energy heads, the energy geeks of those areas, and so that could account for the 22% EV and the 20-something% of people who speak Klingon. Right?
Yeah, on the EV one too. Remember, if you have a household and you have one EV in your household, yeah, there may be 2 cars, there may be 3 cars, but one EV would entitle you to answer that question. So there's going to be some inflation just based on the number of vehicles in a household. But to your point, 22 is a higher number. That surprised us too.
Yeah, but what your main point was, this was a self-selecting group. They got to respond to an energy survey. So there's that sort of implicit bias I shouldn't say that word, but there's a bias that's built into the thought process of who would say, yeah, I'm going to respond to this. And so I understand that there's a certain limitation in the data set that's different than like the DMV registration database, for example, on figuring out EVs in households. And the language thing, it's the same thing. Apparently a lot of people checked other, but when I looked at that list of languages, by all other data, that represents like 98% of all languages used in the Valley. So we ended up with almost 1/4 of other. So anyway, there are limitations to the data set, and I think I understand a little bit more why. So I didn't want to get sidetracked. Margaret had a question.
Thank you. In that same regard, as you look at your target audience, is this group, so these, as Howard mentioned, they're the ones that are already interested in the topic. Is that who you're trying to target to get them to click onto our eHub and whatnot, or are you looking to increase the knowledge and understanding to the masses, the less aware?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we had also done a persona development exercise that was more about attitudes around how, and we have some questions in the survey too, where we're just looking at attitudes, willingness and openness to electrification and the like. I think the SEVI quartile breakdown is more, it's going to be less applicable to how we market necessarily. I mean, there are implications there for sure, but I think it's kind of got like a bigger, we can take that information and look at it more about the way we maybe design some of our customer offers. So it's it could be more about like what promotions we offer through eHub and who we market it to, maybe less so on like messaging differences, but I think it's all like a learning lesson still. Don, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, again, the survey was, people were randomly sampled for the survey. They did have to agree to take the survey. They knew it was about energy. It's hard to ask people to take a survey if you don't tell them what it's about. So there's some self-selection there. But we do see some trends in here. We do see people understanding certain technologies better than others. There are some good takeaways for us here that I think are going to be helpful in general education to the community, as well as targeted communication to certain sectors or certain customers that are interested in, say, a particular technology.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we better move on with the presentation. And just as a quick reminder, Nancy and I will become pumpkins really soon. So
Margaret and you.
Yeah, Margaret and I, let us see a little bit more, Liz, and then you guys can ask all the questions you want because we'll be gone soon.
Okay, I'm going to go really quickly through the next handful of slides.
Thank you.
Just in the interest of time here. Next slide. So relative to understanding of SVCE, 70% of customers that we surveyed here did indicate they had heard of SVCE before this survey. But if you spade into the numbers here a little bit, 3/4 do understand that we're community-owned, not-for-profit agency, but 1/4 still think that we're a branch of PG&E. So some work to do there. Now, relative to our value proposition, 86% believe SVCE provides electricity exclusively from green resources. That's great. And 2/3, plus or minus, believe that our rates are lower than PG&E. So the message seems to be out there, but not universally. Still some work to do. Next slide. In terms of awareness of specific programs, the numbers definitely are reduced versus awareness of us in general. But we did see some interesting results here relative to SEVI quartile. SEVI 4 respondents were more familiar with our CareFira COVID relief efforts. Now, a CareFira customer can be in any SEVI quartile or census tract, but you would expect to see that the numbers skew this way. And in fact, 30% of respondents in SEVI 4 were aware of this, which was reassuring. And then finally, kind of going the other way, as it relates to our work with building codes and reach codes, more than 1/4 of SEVI 1 were familiar with SVCE's work in this area. Next slide. In terms of what customers value the most, they were given this list of 5 things and they had to rank them 1 to 5. And the 2 top items, stable competitive rates and electricity from clean resources, again, in line with our value proposition. And then, I think more work to do in these other areas as it gets into rebates for new services and products, for instance. Next slide. Relative to climate change attitudes, some really interesting results here. Almost 3/4, let's see, I guess this was out of 10. So people ranked, 7 out of 10, their personal responsibility for climate change. And that was very even across SEVI quartile. But when it came to understanding or really thinking about their fossil fuel use in that context, the numbers varied a little bit more by SEVI. So making that connection between fossil fuel use and climate is something where we think there's more work to be done, especially in SEVI 3 and 4. Next. Views on natural gas. Yeah, good news, bad news story here. 80% of customers did correctly identify that gas is a fossil fuel. and 66% recognize the connection with GHGs, but half still think of gas as a clean energy source. So pretty thought-provoking. Next slide. And in terms of understanding kind of the benefits of electricity versus gas, pretty clear around EVs. People recognize them as better for the environment. But when you look at heating, for instance, in a home, less clear. Only half viewed electricity as better for the environment, just over half. And about 60% viewed electricity as a heat source as safer. So definitely work to do here. Next slide. I think this is going to pretty much be it. In terms of interest in upcoming purchases, you definitely see EVs and you see solar at the top of this list, and then energy efficient heat pump water heaters or furnaces. If people even understand that's what a heat pump is, well down on the list. So, 11 and 15%. And this is, again, maybe our slightly more energy oriented customers. Clearly work to do education wise there. Next slide. Okay, this is the last slide. Lots of interest in what customers can do to lower their bill and to implement efficient new technologies. And I think this is just something that's going to be important for us in our messaging. It can't all be about cleaner carbon. We need to definitely keep the economic angle alive here too. So with that, and in the interest of preserving a little time before people have to leave, questions?
So let me officially pass the baton to Nancy because I gotta go. Thank you, Don, and thank you, staff, for everything. Sorry that there was a conflict today, but I gotta be out of here. Thank you, Nancy, for taking over.
I'm gonna head out too. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And to you.
So I'll move to, well, Liz had her hand up, but, and then Rod. So Liz, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, thanks. When can we back up to the slides and show the early slides? So kind of a combination of things. When did you say when the survey was done?
It was, go ahead, Pam.
Sorry, September 11th to October 9th.
Okay, so that's a good information. So maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough, but I think that at the beginning of the presentation, there were two things that I'm not sure you highlighted enough. One is that, and I'm thinking of the board presentation specifically. One is that the survey was taken in our territory by whatever means. It was organized equally among different categories. I'm trying to think of some other things. It would imply that the people that responded have more interest in energy conservation. What I'm thinking of in the back of my mind that it's so important to understand what this survey numbers reflect is it's important for board members to know that it isn't a survey like for me in Campbell. It showed 85% were homeowners, and I know we're 50-50, give or take. So you don't want people reading your data to interpret it as being incorrect or for the communities. I think someone else started to mention that as well. So you want to be sure and help people understand that this survey was selective in covering these 5 categories, which I think was great. They were equally divided in the various areas, and that the response is, if you can say this, is reasonable to say that it's people interested in energy responded, and you recognize that. And the reason I'm thinking that is, one, to prevent misunderstanding, but two, it's the results that you get to that I thought were very, very effective and focused on what we're going to be doing going forward. I can probably be more specific, but I thought that was, the results were very, very effective in understanding why you did this and how it's going to be used, that kind of thing. So that's just kind of my comment.
So just playing that back, making sure that we're clear at the outset about what this sample was. And
Yeah.
that, yeah, this isn't a perfectly randomized, pick somebody off the street at random. This
Yeah.
is a survey set that is going to have some bias in it.
Right, right. And yet it's extremely valuable going forward to understand our audience and how we're going to move forward. I think the setup needs to be a little bit more comprehensive. And then the rest of it, you won't get people like me focusing on what does it say here and why is my community in this percentile, not that one, kind of thing. I want to be more open to hearing what you're learning, not challenging the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good input.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Next up, Rod.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, I think actually the numbers of awareness of our agency we can feel pretty good about. I mean, you've heard about us, 70% believes electricity rates are lower than PG&E, 65% believe electricity exclusively from renewable at 86%, believes Silicon Valley Clean Energy is a community-owned non-for-profit, 72%. I mean, quite frankly, just a very brief story. I was told that if you ever become mayor of Cupertino and your name recognition as having been a former mayor is over 30%, you're doing really, really well, because it's more typically 25%. So I think we should recognize that our efforts have paid off. And yes, it's probably hard to entangle us from PG&E because we appear on the bill, right? So
That is the
if you
biggest
casually
thing.
look at your bill and you see Silicon Valley Clean Energy, you may not really understand the distinction. So I think I think we can feel pretty good about that. What is interesting, right, is the idea that folks in the lower half are not so very close to an electric outlet. Over 20 feet, within about 20 feet, 46% in 3 and 32% in 4. I think that presents a challenge to, the idea that we'd like to have everybody driving EVs in the next few years. And we know the kind of infrastructure that brings outlets out to where cars are parked is the kind of infrastructure that is challenging. You have to go through concrete or underground or something. So we're going to have to think about that carefully. And the governor is too, right? In getting to 2030, his 2035 goal. Expensive things are going to have to change. It's also pretty clear to me that people who feel like they want to be greener can, and when they have a car purchase up, they can easily imagine moving to an EV. What's clearly harder for people to think about is, those gas appliances, are they really so bad? So I think if you see a bunch of Teslas and Chevy Bolts driving around on the street, you can go there. But I think what we've done with building electrification, with the reach codes and our ongoing efforts to move people who may want to we'd like them to replace systems in existing buildings, I think that has a long way to go. And we're going to have to spend some considerable energy to make that happen. I will mention that we had a wonderful climate protection meeting at the Air District last Thursday. It was focused on building decarbonization, building electrification, and there are a whole list of steps that staff are going to take as a result of that meeting. And we may want to think about pitching in. One of them, for example, was the idea of writing a letter to the governor to say, hey, you put out your executive order, which spurred a bunch of agencies to action on cars. The idea that we want to get to EVs by 2035, 2045 for some heavier vehicles. What about a similar executive order for decarbonizing buildings? What if he moved forward? Right now, the state agency that is working on building the next round of building codes, right, is being not very aggressive in what they are considering putting in the next round. That'll come up in 2 years for adoption. So it may be time for us to say, look, this is possible. Dear Governor, we as a community of CCAs, or maybe it's just ours, call on you to issue an executive order to decarbonize buildings, because we know it's a huge deal. We know that our building stock is, it needs to move. And I mean, one of the big things we talked about, and I realize I'm getting a little far away from the survey, so I'll stop very shortly here, but one of the things we thought about is, for a couple of months, August, October, September, during wildfire season, the climate was really hot. Without cooling, you had a lot of people who were in really unhealthy environments. Either they had to go outside because it was so damn hot, or they were living in homes that were far too warm. Because the climate is shifting, the need for cooling, which we never thought we had, is, we're going to have to think more seriously about. Cities like mine opened cooling centers. Well, that becomes really problematic in a pandemic. So things that we thought were impossible, untenable, why would you swap out your furnace? Maybe a motivation is, not only do you replace your furnace with a heat pump electric thing, but at the same time you install cooling, so that with wildfires that seem to be ever more likely, we create the kind of environments, not only in our homes, but our schools and office buildings that allow people to be able to be in healthy environments. So I think this is interesting, and what it tells us is, on the building decarbonization front, yeah, it's like, if you can't imagine this furnace going, because you want to believe you're doing the right thing for the environment, what's so bad about a gas furnace? Well, we got news for you, right? And actually, it is a fairly cost-effective thing to swap out if you also need cooling. So anyway, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Rod. I had just a question before we go to the members of the public. One is, basically, this is very interesting, and thanks for the update about the digital pivot. Would you give us a sense of what your next steps are, given the survey results, about how you were going to move forward with more digital content? Have you come up with any approaches yet that you are ready to share with the board or executive committee?
Shall I jump in, Pam, or?
Sure.
So as Pam mentioned, we have our first promotion that we're literally rolling out starting this week, and it's going to go through the next 6 or 8 weeks. We're going to learn a lot from that. We're going to be planning promotions for probably at least one more through the remainder of the year. We're also working on a calendar of email campaigns. So we're thinking about a campaign that's focused around vehicle electrification, one that's focused around storage plus solar, bringing people again back to the resources that we have on our website and ways that they can engage. So we have a calendar that's coming together, and in the messaging that we put around that, we certainly are going to take learnings out of what we've gained from this survey. But that's probably about as specific as I think we could be at this point. Pam, if you have anything else to add, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that we, with some of the campaigns, are going to want to be targeted, and that we want relevant information to go to the right people. We don't want to, spend a lot of effort advertising solar and battery storage to a group of renters, for example. So I think we'll be pretty thoughtful in some of our outreach, while also not stifling any opportunities for folks to learn about everything that we're doing at the same time. So there's going to be a balance in our approach there.
Okay. All right. So thanks, everybody. I don't see any more questions from the board, so, or executive committee. So I'll move to the members of the public. If there's anyone from the public who would like to speak on this topic, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And you can also press *9 on your phone if you're dialed in. Clerk, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay, so bring it back to the board or the executive committee. I don't see any hands up. Oh, yes, I do, actually. Liz, please, what's your question?
So this is a broad comment. When we do newsletters and different things, we send it out, and I don't believe we send them out to all council members as well as city managers. I think you should see if you could do a group email, particularly with all the new council members coming in. There's quite a few of them in our area, to just make a special mailing list, newsletters, anything. We're trying. I think that's a very important group to reach, and an easy way to do that is to send out this information rather than just to board members or whomever.
Okay, thanks, Liz. I don't see any other comments. Thanks very much for the update. Very, very interesting. It's great to hear what people are thinking. And after several years in operation, how we're getting the word out. So that's really, really helpful to know. And with that, we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda. So the CEO report.
Hello. I don't have too much for today, but we do have something I'd like Andrea to introduce. So Andrea, when do you introduce this next item?
Yes, thank you. So being that it's been a couple of months that we've spoken with you about the board succession modules, the planning modules that we are working on, we've been working with Karen Nelson, and she has developed a draft for you all to see. This is the first time you all will see this. Again, this is a draft, something that we've been working on, but we did want to show you our efforts. And so with that, Karen, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to showing this. It's a preliminary draft. It's still in PowerPoint. It's ultimately will be a PowerPoint video, as Andrea mentioned. And so I'm just going to share my screen now and let you see where the progress we're making. And so let's see. Let me pull this up, and hopefully everyone will see my screen as soon as I start the slideshow. There we are. Can everyone see this full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, excellent. All right, well, here we go. Silicon Valley Clean Energy welcomes you to the first in a series of educational modules created to build awareness about SVCE's mission, share why and how we take action, and provide context for strategic planning and program implementation. This first module addresses the urgency we face if we are to achieve our mission and goals. It demonstrates the need for taking rapid action now if we are to bend the carbon curve downward and stem the global climate crisis. Greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, are driving global warming. Average temperatures are increasing at an alarming rate. This increase in global temperature is creating extreme weather patterns and spawning devastating events. Animal habitats and entire ecosystems are being destroyed, and infectious disease and pandemics are on the rise. Global warming is putting our entire planet at risk. Here in California, the most immediate impacts include an increase in dangerous and life-threatening heat waves. "2020 has topped all records. Climate reality-induced drought is putting our water supply at risk, and it's costing California farmers billions of dollars, jeopardizing the nation's food supply and putting ecosystems at risk." So where are these greenhouse gas emissions coming from in California? Electricity from in-state and import energy sources contributes 15% of our emissions. Commercial and residential sector on-site fuel combustion delivers 12% of the total. Transportation represents the largest sector at 41%. Agriculture and industrial make up the balance at 8% and 24% respectively. Since 2006, California has aggressively addressed greenhouse gas reduction through executive orders and legislative acts. By 2016, we'd already achieved the 2020 target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels. The 2030 target calls for greenhouse gas emission reductions to 40% below the 1990 levels. That's 260 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent that must be eliminated, with electricity contributing 46 million metric tons of the total. The 2050 target is an even more ambitious target. It calls for reductions to 80% below 1990 levels. This will require an additional 61 to 74% reduction below the currently forecasted 2030 greenhouse gas level. We've played an important role in meeting these targets since our inception in 2016, when 13 Santa Clara County communities came together to form Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Central to our mission, we've helped thousands of residential and industrial customers reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, delivering electricity that is carbon-free, affordable, and reliable. During that time, we've been laser-focused on this, dedicating 90% of our budget to clean power supply. As of 2019, SVCE's carbon-free electricity supply has avoided 530 million pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. That's an overall emission reduction of 24%. We continue to invest in renewable power resources, and we're on track to achieving our long-term clean energy goals. In just 3 years, we've invested $1 billion in clean renewable resources, resources that will provide clean power for the next 20 years. As of 2020, we've generated 310 megawatts of renewable energy from solar with storage and geothermal energy. Hundreds more are coming. And we're encouraging customers to deploy behind-the-meter storage. Efforts to increase energy efficiency and grid integration are ongoing. But bending the carbon curve downward requires an expansion of our focus. While power supply will remain at the heart of our strategy, we must also target the built environment and transportation sectors for emissions reduction. As of 2018, 51% of the energy consumed by California buildings from natural gas and other fossil fuels. To decarbonize the built environment, we must shift away from natural gas to all electric. To meet the scale and complexity of this challenge, we've pursued a multi-pronged education and outreach effort, including supporting the adoption of emission controlling reach codes by our member jurisdictions, offering rebates to single-family and multifamily household customers or heat pump water heater upgrades, creating eHub, a comprehensive online resource for helping customers understand their energy use and emissions, and providing tools to help them take action. Transportation is an even bigger challenge. It's the leading source of California emissions. Passenger vehicles account for 28 of the total 41% of transportation emission contribution. To meet state greenhouse gas reduction goals requires fundamental transformation in the way we travel. SVCE's ability to supply clean energy to many modes of transportation, from electric cars and heavy trucks to rail, will help clear a path for faster emission reduction. In fact, we've already allocated $8 million for initiatives including EV customer education, working on reach codes that advance EV build-out, and creating EV-specific electric rates. And we plan to do even more. While our state has exceeded its target for short-term greenhouse gas reductions, it isn't enough. California's current annual rate of cutting emissions by 1.15% will delay meeting our 2030 target until 2061. And we could be more than 100 years late in meeting our 2050 target. Bottom line, we are in a race against time to meet California's challenging targets and to save our planet and ourselves. We must do more. We must take bold action now to innovate effective mechanisms to reduce emissions from our power supply, our buildings, and our transportation sectors. Power supply and the grid must be expanded with more solar plus storage and with other clean energy investments. And we must intensify our promotion of efficiency and utility grid integration. Buildings need to be rapidly electrified by market mobilization using programs, education, and incentives for heat pumps and energy efficiency. Transportation must be transformed with widespread electrification of passenger vehicles, continued attention to accelerated electric vehicle incentives, expanded EV charging programs, and support for medium and heavy-duty fleet electrification. We need to move quickly to remove market barriers caused by regulations and policy. To win this race, we must be in it together. each of us taking responsibility for our role in making clean energy supply a tool of progress, a platform for a safe, strong, sustainable tomorrow. Okay, and we're out of the PowerPoint. So still work to be done, but it gives you a sense of where Girish and Andrea have asked me to head.
Thank you, Karen. Nancy, if you wouldn't mind, I'll just make a couple of comments.
Sure.
So just to frame this, we wanted to have a big picture initial video, and the audience is basically our board members and our new board members. That's the audience. And then we have about 10 more videos that get into detail on, say, like, what is the board's role and where is the board's involvement in strategic planning and oversight. And then we get into some details on that. So we keep it really high level so that those, say, 10 videos, starting with this one, which is kind of like an umbrella, right? So this one talks about power supply. It talks about the different kinds of programs that we have and really stays big picture, and also looks at a time frame of a couple of decades. Everything else are kind of details, like what's RPS, what's our compliance deadlines, all those things. We'll talk a little bit about that to give our board and especially the new board members some context. We're going to create about 10 more videos, each of them being about 3 to 5 minutes long. So we hope to get this first video done and provided to the new board members when they join in the January, February timeframe. So we'd love so the idea here is to just give you a glimpse of the draft and get any comments you may have on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish and Karen. And we'll go first to Liz.
Oh, I so love to talk. So thank you. I think you all know I've been very supportive of this aspect of needing to train and introduce new board members to our group and to the work of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. So thank you very, very much. I would have a couple of thoughts, but one thing in the latter part of the presentation in particular, I think you might, and I'll be curious what others think, need to listen to it as a board member. There was a little bit, and maybe I'm making an assumption that anyone who's agreed to be on the board is already on board with the energy issues and greenhouse gas. I thought the last part of it was a little bit too pedantic, a little too teachy of, you know, we have to do this, we have to do that. I would think that you could rephrase that, something like Silicon Valley Clean Energy is committed to this through the actions of the board. Silicon Valley Clean Energy is something like that. I think something of that might make a connection to the new board members and what their role and responsibility is. If that helps.
Great.
Thank you, Liz. Rod, did you have anything you wanted to say? You don't have your hand up or anything. Oh, yes, you do. Okay, Rod.
Yeah, I agree with Liz. If the target is incoming board members, I would probably not overproduce this, nor you know, amp up too much the fact that climate change is a real thing. I think there are plenty of resources out there that do that, and yeah, maybe get more to the point of this is our mission, right? So you don't have to say this was our mission or this should be our mission, but yeah, this is our mission. And, you know, I suppose if you were trying to get to a school classroom or something, you could do a lot of that, the rest of it. But I don't think we need to duplicate the efforts of so many who have, frankly, that told the story of climate change so effectively in other forms. So, yeah.
I will echo the sentiments of my colleagues that as a incoming, if this is targeted to incoming board members, a little less hyperbole at the end and a little bit more, I think, intro to CCAs might be, or tying it back to the role of the communities in addressing these concerns. I think that would be really important, because I think the message that you want to have land is that the board members and the communities they serve are a critical part of the solution to climate change. And that point got missed, in my opinion, in this first draft. So I think it's a fabulous first draft, and lays out things fairly well. It's just a little bit of preaching to the choir. And I think we're kind of beyond that with the fires and all that. I think a tone of being able to take action as a community through the CCA board membership would be fabulous. And the other thing that I noted is that if these training materials are to be, have a lifespan of a year or 2 or 3 even, the one thing I noticed was that there was mention of a specific amount of money that SVCE allocated to the efforts of $8 million. And that presumably will be growing over the next period of time. So I don't know if you wanted to make it a little bit more, shall we say, forward-looking, or put in a date as of this date we've done this, just to indicate, that the efforts aren't going, and the amounts of money will be, a lot of investment will be needed to make these changes. So I think that's another important aspect of, there was a lot of talk about the contribution of various industries toward greenhouse gas emissions. And I think making a more pointed connection between the amount of money invested and what there is yet to accomplish. I think it's there. I think a bit more connection of the dots there could be helpful as well. I think it's a fabulous effort, and I see that Rod has his hand up, so I'm wrapping up what I wanted to say, and back to you, Rod.
I just lowered my hand, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I got my comments in.
Liz?
My virtual hand here. So I really think that both you and Rod had some very good comments. Rod mentioned the mission statement. I think introducing our mission statement might not be a bad thing. I appreciate we're trying to stay high level, but I liked the comments that kind of brought it at the ending into what Silicon Valley Clean Energy has done and what it's going to be doing. And I think our mission statement is quite unique because it's not simply providing. A lot of people coming in might think we're there just to provide energy, clean energy, and it's so much more than that. And I think that if that thought was running through the presentation, I think it would tie it back to why it's great to be on the board and see what what's been done and what the future is. And it's more than just simply clean energy. And then I would tie it back to the comment on the circle diagram. We see that circle diagram in so many different ways. And a lot of times, most times, I think it's described as being, 40, 45% buildings and 40, 45% vehicles. And that chart didn't quite connect with some of the way you hear other information. So I would take a look at that and see how that fits in. And this might be, Garish, you probably, you started to comment on this. I do think it's helpful to understand, let's see here. So we know we've got a problem, as Rod said, that's pretty much convinced from other sources. But when you're providing power, clean power, we are dealing with long range planning. Well, I was trying to find a way to say regulation. I think it's important to understand that it's not simply the purchasing of power. It's much more than that from our mission statement, but also more complex because of the environment in which we provide that product, which is including regulations, so CPUC and things. So I think as you finish it, I think if you have this thought of, where does Silicon Valley clean energy fit in? What has been done? What will be done? That kind of thing, if that helps. That's what I was hearing from the conversation.
Thank you, Liz. I'll move now to members of the public. We're in a virtual setting. If you want to speak on this topic, please do so by raising your virtual hand or pressing *9 if you are dialed in. Clerk, is there a member of the public who would like to speak on this item?
Yes, Tony Yulo.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I agree with most of the comments issued by the board members. The one point I want to take maybe a slight issue with is something you said, Liz, which is that people are going to already be on board when they get on the board. And I think that it's important that the organization realize that, the day may come when a climate denier gets elected and gets appointed to this board, so we do need to think about that. I know that Andrea has kind of provided the committee and board with a list of kind of the planned modules, I think, in the past for this. And I think it might be useful when looking at these in the future to see a presentation on that list of what the different modules are going to cover and what the purpose of each one would be, so that things can be considered in context. Thanks for considering my input.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
So actually, Nancy, I have a couple of things I want to complete my CEO report with.
Oh, sure. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on with the remainder of your report.
Yeah, and thank you very much for your feedback. If I may summarize it, what I'm taking, and we do have the video here recorded. We're going to cut some of the previous work that's done, right? So to the extent that others have done research on defining the problem, et cetera, we're not going to repeat too much on that. We'll focus a little bit more on the mission and our work. And I think those last points, I think what you were mentioning, Liz, and what Tony also said, I think we'll also frame some of what's coming up in these trainings, so it'll provide some context. All right, couple of other updates. One is on the prepay, the power prepay. We have the board approved the financial advisor contract. We'll be bringing to the board in January the bond conduit JPA. So that's something that that's for CCA's Marin, East Bay, C3E, and us, founding members of the bond conduit JPA. And that's being formed as we speak. And so we'll be bringing that to you in January. So I'll be providing, as part of the CEO report, I'll be mentioning that at the December meeting. On the Super JPA, California Community Power, we will be bringing that to the board for approval at the December 9th meeting. And lastly, on the CRCR program, the $10 million program, there was one program which had to do with online contractor training and offering a $500 stipend for those who had completed that training. There's a slight delay in that, and we expect to launch it end of March 2021. I think in terms of effectiveness, the delay really is not going to be a big deal. I think this is the first time we've been in the online training business, and it's a lot more complicated than we envisioned right up front. So we are working on that, and in March 2021 is our planned launch. So that's all I have for the CEO report.
Great, thank you, Girish. I will move on to well, I guess I better open it up to the public again, since we had another topic and completely different topic. So if there's any members of the public who wish to speak on the remainder of the CEO report, please indicate so by raising your hand or pressing *9 on your phone if you're dialed in. Agency clerk, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on the remainder of the CEO report?
No comments received.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, we'll close this item and move on to staff or executive committee member updates or topics. I don't see any, so I believe we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 12:46.